Thanks very much for joining us. On the call with us, joining us today, obviously there's myself, I'm the lead from StreetGames for Research and Insight, and I'm joined by Dan Grice, who's my colleague. And we're also joined by Kelly Smith from the Sport for Development Coalition, who will be sharing some information shortly. So in terms of the session today, we're obviously talking about evidencing impact. So wanted to share with you initially a little bit about what we mean by evidencing impact and why it's important, but also share some reflections about the current context and the impact of the pandemic and what we feel may have changed slightly over the last year, but we'd be really keen to hear your experiences as well. And then also delve into a few different approaches and tools which might help you to evidence impact. But also hear from you whether you've done something that's worked really, really well. And also at the end, kind of hear from you about what might help you going forwards. But I am really mindful that we've only got an hour today, so it will be very much a whistle-stop tour. But I'm hoping that it'll sort of start the conversations and do keep in touch in terms of sharing and asking. So I guess what I wanted to do initially was just kind of get your thoughts about, from your perspective, what word or words spring to mind when you think about evidencing impact. And I wanted to do that using Mentimeter. I think a lot of you will have used Mentimeter before, but if you can open up either on your phone or on your laptop, a browser, and just go into mentimeter.com. So it should look like the little screen on the right there. When you get into Mentimeter, if you can add the code 214116669, which I think Dan will put into the chat, and then just add a word or word that springs to mind, and I will hopefully be able to see what the responses are. So hopefully everyone okay with Mentimeter? Have you got that code there? Here we go, brilliant.
Ah, there we go.
It's flying now, so yeah. So measure, evaluate, new ideas, great, innovation, robust, educate, real stories, difficulty to implement, attendance, evaluate, change, innovation. So I think there's some really, really some great words there, and also I think shows kind of how diverse the topic is, and probably also how challenging it can be. So we'll save that there. I will escape out that one and go back into the presentation. So yeah, I guess I absolutely recognise what lots of you said there about evidencing impact. I guess if we take the dictionary definition, or a dictionary definition, what we mean by evidencing impact, we're talking about the effect of something has had, especially something new, on a person, or really it's about being able to show the difference of our activities or the support we've given has made. And I guess the diagrams that I put at the bottom was really kind of hopefully reflecting some of the things that you'd said. So, you know, is it the journey? Are we talking about the journey that we've been on? Are we talking about statistics and data? Or are we talking about lived experiences? And I think it's all of those things. And I guess it's about deciding what's right for you or the situation. I guess reflecting on the past year and the impact of the pandemic, I think the first thing to say is I think it's been really, really clear how important the contribution that sport can make to society. During those lockdowns, how valued was that opportunity to take exercise outdoor? Also, how much do people really miss taking part in sport? And that first lockdown, they really, really missed watching sport. And there was really widespread recognition of the value of sport in terms of helping people to be active, but also in terms of how it can really boost our well-being. And that's something that we've heard lots and lots from young people that we've spoken to. So I guess as a result of that, I guess from a sector, I think the time is now. We've got a real opportunity to build on this and to show how important sport is in general and to the nation's recovery, and whether that's in terms of its value on well-being and wider social outcomes, but also very much so in terms of helping to address inequalities and that levelling up agenda. So there's a real opportunity, if we can get evidencing impact strongly, to speak collectively to government and key stakeholders. And as community organisations, we know that financially things have been really tough over the past year, 16 months financially. But despite that, there's just been so much amazing work that's been undertaken. Lots of LTOs in the Street Games network have shared some absolutely amazing work that they've done. So it's really, really important that we're able to demonstrate that impact and share it across funders and to be able to attract new funding. But also as community organisations, it's really, really important if you can demonstrate impact and monitor and evaluate, to be able to track your progress, to guide decision making and to improve your service users. And I guess also it's, from our perspective, it's seen as to being fundamental in relation to sustainability. So sustainability shouldn't just be about getting funding in, it's about demonstrating your impact, it's about building up your workforce, building partnerships, and also governance. So I think it's really, really important. So I guess from our perspective, we feel like everything in the past year, the way sport has been delivered has really shifted. And with that in mind, so too is some of the approaches to learning and evaluation. And our experience from some of the funders that we're working with has been perhaps a shift away from just purely counting numbers to a recognition of the value of capturing real-time and practical learning and helping to make in-flight adjustments to shape delivery. And also, like from my perspective, it's been really welcome that there's been a recognition around how important it is to make your monitoring and evaluation led by stakeholders and responsive to the context, and not saying this specific method has to be used with everybody. So I think in summary, I guess what we would feel, I'd be interested to hear, pop it in the chat box if you felt the same, that there's definitely a role for things like standardized quantitative measures and tools, but there's also a role for more qualitative exploration and for sharing those lived experiences and personal stories. And very often there's a really good reason to use both of them. But it can be really challenging. We're absolutely, you know, really in recognition of that. And obviously I've been involved in the Street Game Network for many years, and I just know how hard it is for lots of small to medium community organisations when you're very busy delivering frontline activities to have enough resources and time to do monitoring and evaluation. But also short-term funding doesn't help. It's really hard to show impact on young people's lives and experiences over short-term periods. And sometimes it can be difficult to know what to measure, how to measure. And it might not be prioritised. Can be also perhaps not in the culture of an organisation. So it really, really can be difficult. So I guess I'd like to hear from you guys, and if we go back to using Mentimeter again, on the same code name, if you can pop in, what are your biggest challenges in evidencing impact? So I'll pop Mentimeter back up again, so excuse me, flicking between screens. But if you could go back to your phones or your devices again, we'll go into this one. So what are the biggest challenges that you're facing? Yeah, time and resources, resource constraints, time consuming 100%, resources and capacity, yeah, totally understand that. Knowing what to impact in the first place, comparisons between other organisations, knowing how to best do it, getting responses from participants, buy-in from partners, knowing the approaches and tools to evidence impact. These are, some really, sort of recognisable challenges. It really isn't easy. Quality data, making it accessible, culture within the organisation, having the right tools effectively. So thanks so much for sharing those. Yeah, I would absolutely recognise all of those. And I don't know that we'll be able to solve all of them today, but we'll hopefully give you a few tips and ideas which might help a little, and absolutely not trying to diminish how challenging it will be. And I think we'll continue to kind of lobby on your behalf to try and make it as easy as possible and to capture, make it fit for the situations and the context which you're all working in. So I will sharing that and we'll go back to the presentation. But thank you, that's really interesting. Great. So so I guess initially I just wanted to talk through a little bit of things which may or may not help you. And the first thing was really in relation to kind of quantitative data and tools. And as I said, I think we're still very much on a journey in terms of monitoring and evaluation. But I'd like to think that in most cases, we've kind of moved on from the scribbling names of participants in the coach's pocket and simply counting numbers. But what I would say is if you can capture monitoring data, it can be really powerful if it's done well and if it's reviewed and if it's used. So it's not just about counting numbers for numbers' sake, but it's really important to understand how you're going to use that data. So it could be about understanding who's coming and what difference the sessions are making. Are the sessions attracting the intended target group? So if you're capturing rigorously the types of demographic information around age, ethnicity, gender, etc., you can really understand who's coming to the sessions. You can also, if you're capturing how frequently they're coming, look at participation patterns and understand something about retention and dropout. So it's not just about hitting targets, it might be about understanding patterns. So whilst you don't need to kind of look at the graph in detail here, but this was something that we were able to do through doorstep sport data. We were able to look at and share back with LTOs in the network some information about, well, typically if you can get them to come 3 or 4 times, they're far more likely to stay and remain. It's those first 3 sessions which are really critical in terms of potentially dropping out, but also in terms of participation patterns and about sharing what might be a sort of likely participation pattern amongst young people. They aren't going to turn up week in, week out, 52 weeks of the year. It's just unrealistic, but the typical patterns we could share. Another thing that you can do if you are capturing data quite sort of rigorously is what's called the levels of engagement. It can be used in the views monitoring system, or you can use it manually, but it's about asking a coach or a leader to say what a young person's level of engagement is at one point in time and at a second point in time. So for example, initially they might sit out, they might have disputes, but who knows, in a couple of months' time, they might dip into sessions and then they might go on to make connections or even eventually take on leadership role. And this ladder of engagement has been really important when we've done work in relation to community of safety, because it's been about being able to show that interaction and that engagement and kind of building of those pro-social values and behaviours amongst young people. It wasn't specifically, for example, around physical activity, it was about their level of engagement. And then another way that if you capture data rigorously and you can use it, as I said at the beginning, is kind of being able to show that you are attracting the intended target group. So with this one, the yellow dots are where participants who came to sessions live, and the red area shows high areas of deprivation. So we were able to show very specifically that the young people that were coming to sessions were from areas of high deprivation. They weren't driving in from affluent areas to come to sessions, so the sessions were absolutely attracting the young people that it was intended to do. Obviously, questionnaires, they can be challenging, but they can really be useful in terms of demonstrating a difference. So depending on what your outcomes are, is it about whether people are more active, maybe about confidence, or maybe around building those, if you like, protective factors like resilience and belonging. It can be really useful to use surveys, and there are lots of validated questions and surveys and existing tools out there that can make life a lot easier, because you don't need to make up your own questions and you can compare your results. So in this example here, that was from My Time Active in Bromley, they used validated questions and a very simple survey with some of their participants. And as you can see on the left graph, they were able to show how much more active their participants came. They had a significant increase in those that were active in the purple graph after they'd been coming to sessions compared to before sessions, and a reduction in inactives. And they were also able to compare their results because they used the ONS wellbeing questions. They could compare their participants with teenagers nationally and show that actually their participant scores were better. And that was really, really useful to them in terms of demonstrating their impact to their stakeholders and funders. So there are lots of question guides out there. So for example, this is Sport England's question guide, and I can pop in the chat later some other places where you can go, and they'll share with you typical questions that you might want to ask if you're looking at, for example, physical well-being or mental well-being. There's other places that you can look at, like What Works Wellbeing or WhenWebs. And we've also got some information on our website. But there's also some tools that make it really easy to do that as well. And at this point, I just wanted to bring in Kelly from the Sport for Development Coalition.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. As Ceris mentioned, I'm Kelly. I am the Insight and Engagement Officer at the Coalition. And for those of you who might not be aware, the Sport for Development Coalition is sort of an organisation of around 200 organisations that are interested in using sport to achieve sort of positive social outcomes. So we're sort of a movement and a network of all of those organisations who are sort of working collectively to use sport sort of intentionally to achieve positive social outcomes. And I work as sort of the back end team. So just to sort of speak to Ceris's points today around some of the tools that you could use, I'm going to just talk a little bit about the coalition sort of approach to shared measurement. And Ceris was mentioning there using sort of validated survey questions and validated tools. We have sort of a project at the coalition at the moment called the sort of collective survey tool and reporting dashboard that is focused around providing shared measurement to sport for development organisations and organisations using sport to achieve positive social outcomes sort of across the sector. And yeah, so we've just sort of launched a project in that. So I'll sort of come on to that next and tell you a little bit about the sort of shared measurement and the survey questions that we use in terms of evidencing impact. So yeah, as I mentioned, we're sort of a movement of 200 organisations who are all using sport to achieve positive social outcomes, and our sort of mission is working towards every person in the UK recognising and valuing the role that sport can play in changing lives and ensuring that they have the freedom to access it without barriers. And our work is kind of made up of 3 pillars, and I lead on the impact pillar, and that's what we're going to be sort of going over today, which is sort of building the case for sport for development. How can we build the evidence base of all of the great, amazing work that all of you do, and then use this to sort of speak to governments and policymakers in a united voice. So just before I come on to the collective survey tool and the sort of shared measurement work that we're doing at the moment, I thought I would just sort of frame why we're doing this work and why we think using sort of shared measurements from across the sector is important. So where was I? Just talking about sort of shared measurement across the sport development sector. So coming back to sort of Ceris's point at the beginning, I think during the pandemic, it's sort of been shown how important sport can be within those lockdowns, and how important community organisations like all of you on the call are in using sport as a tool to create sort of positive social outcomes. And I think there's a real opportunity now as we come out of the pandemic and into sort of the recovery for us to collect an evidence base that we can then use to advocate to policymakers and governments around sort of the importance and the real great work that sport development organisations can achieve. And I think I saw someone mentioned about sort of one of their biggest challenges in M&E was sort of comparing to other organisations. With this collective survey tool and reporting dashboard that I'm going to come on to, the questions that are taken from sort of validated questions from UK population surveys will sort of help organisations to compare with national data sets. So you're not just comparing yourself to other organisations who maybe up until now are using different measurements to you, so it's quite hard to compare and see how maybe 2 organisations in the same geographic location, what's sort of working for them and sort of not working for them, and not being able to sort of really share and learn from each other. Hopefully this collective survey tool and reporting dashboard work that we're doing that is sort of available to the StreetGames network will be able to sort of promote this learning, and promote learning not just across sport for development organisations, but against sort of national data as well. So as a part of our impact work within the Sport Development Coalition, we've introduced this collective survey tool and reporting dashboard, which essentially is just a survey of 27 questions that are all taken, validated questions taken from national UK population surveys. That we have about 50 organisations at the moment that are sort of ready to start using the survey. I think I've seen a couple of you on the call that are also using this, or already sort of signed up to use the tool and reporting dashboard as well. So we're going to be using this survey to collect data on their initiatives and their sport development projects. So they'll be able to better evidence their impact as an organisation, because they'll have these quantitative data sets and measures all around tracking the evidence, tracking the impact of sort of social outcomes. So it's sort of moving beyond who's getting sort of the participation, who's coming to your sessions, with sort of looking at the impact that you're having on your participants in terms of outcomes as well. And the survey was created by a group of 15 organisations from the coalition called sort of the co-creation group. So it's been sort of a truly collaborative effort from the start, and StreetGames were a big part in sort of driving that work as well. And they've aligned the sort of questions in the survey to the DCMS Sporting Future Strategy. And as I mentioned there, you can see from the sort of questions on the screen that they're all taken from sort of national validated data sets. So you'll have sort of the national average as your control group that you could then benchmark against. So that's sort of the survey tool. And then the other part is the reporting dashboard. So the tool's sort of deployed through a reporting dashboard, which uses progressive web app technology. So it means if you are at a session and you don't have data or Wi-Fi, you can still use the survey, collect your results, it's stored, and then when you go back into sort of data and Wi-Fi range, like you go back to the office, it's all uploaded. So it's really easy for coaches or volunteers who are collecting data at their sessions to gather this data and then store it into this reporting dashboard. And the reporting dashboard basically is a sort of this dashboard that shows you in real time all of the results from the data that you've collected, so you can analyze it really quickly and easily. I'll just go over to this. So this next slide just shows a little bit of what the reporting dashboard looks like. So you can see sort of the different questions that you have in there. So we have questions that are aligned to different social outcomes, and then we have around 6 or 7 questions that are all around demographics, so who you're working with, tracking things like age, ethnicity, gender. We also collect postcodes, so going back to the really great model that Ceris shared earlier, you can track by sort of your IMD as well. I'll just pick out a couple of the questions here. So on sort of the right hand side of the slide, you can see the sort of overall wellbeing questions. So those 3 questions are all taken from the Office of National Statistics Wellbeing survey. So you can see those 3 lines are sort of those scores from your participants, and then what you'll be able to do is add in a line that shows the national averages for that question as well, so you can benchmark against sort of national averages. And then the other sort of really key question to pick out is the length of participation. So on the sort of left-hand bottom side of the screen, there's a graph that shows well-being by length of participation. There's a really great question on the survey that asks the participants how long they've been involved in the project. And then what you can do is track their well-being change over time, or as sort of your group of participants, you can track the well-being change over time. So this means that you don't have to do lots of data collection. You could just do one round of data collection if you wanted to. So instead of maybe doing it at the start of your project and the end of your project, you could just do one, and then you could see by length of time that those participants have been involved. You can sort of compare that to the other questions, so it could show sort of their well-being going up over time, hopefully. But again, you could also use it more, you could also collect the data more than once and use the survey more than once if you wanted to. But as everybody sort of pointed out at the beginning, sort of time and resources for evidencing your impact can be a real struggle. So having that ability to just deploy the survey once and collect your data could be a real bonus for your organisation. It's quite flexible in that sense. So just to sort of recap on what I've gone over with the sort of collective survey tool and reporting dashboard, it's a really easy 27 question survey. It takes around 3 to 5 minutes for participants to fill in. And it uses validated questions from UK National Population Survey, so you can benchmark against that national average data. And we hope with deploying this across the sort of sport for development sector, we'll also get a sort of, you'll be able to benchmark against the sort of average of the sport for development sector as well. The tool is system agnostic, and it can work with maybe your existing M&E software. It's just sort of a survey that can sort of be deployed through different M&E systems, and we're sort of working that out. This is the sort of first iteration of the tool. I think the co-creation group started designing and developing this collective survey tool and reporting dashboard back in 2019 or 2018, Ceris?
That's a very good question. I think it was 2018, possibly.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah, initially, yeah.
And now we've got to this stage where we're sort of rolling it out to the wider network of sport for development. So this is sort of the first iteration, first sort of pilot. So we're sort of working out how it can work with different M&E software as well. The surveys are deployed through progressive web app technology, so they can be completed on mobile devices without using phone memory or needing to be sort of downloaded. You can also get sort of a paper version of the survey and then enter the results into the reporting dashboard as well. Or you send out sort of a customized survey link to your participants, and then they just click the link and fill it in as well. It's quite flexible in that sense, and you get the reporting dashboard along with it, which basically you can analyze your results in sort of live time, and you can download those charts and graphs. So if you were doing maybe a funding bid or an application, or you would just want to evidence back to your organization or your coaches and show sort of what's working and what impact you're having, it's really easy to just sort of download those graphs and charts as well. And just before I sort of hand back to Ceris, the stage that we're at the moment, as I mentioned, this is sort of the first iteration and first sort of pilot of the tool this year. So at the Sport for Development Coalition, we're sort of access and scope to use the tool for the rest of this year. And then we're hoping to have sort of the next iteration of the tool in place after that. So if anyone is interested in using the tool, you can either get in touch with Ceris or myself, and we can sort of facilitate that. And just one quick more thing before I sort of hand back is that, as I mentioned earlier, it's all sort of aligned to the DCMS Sporting Future Strategy, and those are sort of some of the outcome areas that the tool covers. So if you're sort of deciding whether it's relevant to your work, those are sort of the areas that the questions cover and that you can sort of benchmark against national data. So it could be sort of a really interesting and great sort of tool to use on sort of the quantitative side of your evidencing your impact. So yeah, and there are a couple of sort of supporting documentation that I can sort of send around, or ask Ceris to send around with the slides after the session today. And yeah, if anybody is interested and wanted to look at using the tool, as I said, you can use it through the coalition for the rest of this year, and then we're hoping to have sort of a second iteration in place after this year. And you can use it through StreetGames, so you can get in touch with Ceris. So I'll hand back to Ceris now.
Great, thanks Kelly. Yeah, and I know there's a question in the chat around, is there a cost for us? At the moment, we've got some free users, haven't we, for the next year. So as Kelly said, if you want to either get in touch with either Kelly or myself direct, we can kind of provide some additional information. So I will carry on. Okay, so I mean, I'd agree with Kelly that the tool is really simple to use. We have got some organisations in the StreetGames network that are using it and that are using it at the moment. So it is really simple to use, and it can be really, really helpful. So I'd encourage you to take a look at it, if nothing else. I guess we just wanted to kind of share really briefly that there are other tools that you might want to find helpful. So for example, if you're interested in a social value in terms of a financial value, it might be that one of these other tools works better for you. So there's a sport value bank, and that works similarly through surveys and questions, but it will come out with a social, if you like, a pound sign for your social value. There's also the hacked social value bank, which has lots and lots of different questions and bank of indicators which you can use, which will also equate a financial value. So for example, for volunteers, for taking part in sport or apprentices. Then at the bottom, State of Life, which actually State of Life is who we've developed the Sport for Development tool with, so it's very similar. Or it might be that you need a very specific individual social return on investment project. So it's really kind of just making you aware there are other things that might fit the bill, but I would definitely urge you to have a look at the coalition tool. I guess, as we said at the beginning, I think it's really important to tailor your approach to your audience and to your specific circumstances. And whilst in some cases surveys and monitoring data might work really well, and I know that in some projects and young people, they really like it because it is kind of anonymous and it's quick and easy. But in other cases, it might not be quite right. And you might want to go down the route of more, if you like, ethnographical methods. So kind of observing things as they happen, or using more creative methods, whether that's sort of like arts methods or use of technology. And I'll touch on some of those in a moment. I mean, I love using lots of different creative methods, but I would say a word of caution: it may not be easier and it may not be quicker. And it might be something where perhaps a partnership with a university would be really helpful. There's lots of, I know we've got Chris Cutforth on the call and he might want to pop something in the chat, but I get contacted lots by students and by lecturers saying we'd love to do projects. So it could be that you could form a partnership without having to, you know, it might be that they want to do it and there isn't a huge cost. But I think it can be a really exciting way of getting information and stories in a different way. So one example that we're currently using at the minute is through some doorstep sport activities that are taking place in Newcastle, Liverpool and Merthyr. London Marathon Trust is funding the work, and they required that we did an evaluation, but we've done it, if you like, from a young person's perspective, through working with a research organisation who are using an online community forum. So we asked some of the LTOs to get only around 18 young people in total. And every 6 months through the online community, they touch point in with them and ask them a few questions, and they could set tasks. And the young people can give their responses. Either they can type if they want to, just using their phone, or they can post a video or an audio or photos. And it's a really, really brilliant way of bringing to life their experiences and thoughts. And it's been really interesting because obviously it's been a really unusual time in terms of gathering feedback from those young people. And they really spoke passionately about how much they value their sessions and being able to be active, and how much they missed them during the lockdown. So that can be really, really valuable. What I was going to share with you is there's I don't know whether you've heard of Inspiring Impact. They are a really, really great organisation and website, and what they've created on their website is what they're calling evaluation cards. And they've got lots and lots of different, if you like, little cards that say you might want to try, for example, vox pops or photo interviews, and it tells you how to do them and some tips. So if you're interested in looking at some more creative methods, I would definitely suggest you have a look at their website. Certainly lots of good ideas, and if you're working with young people, it can be a really great way of asking the young people how they'd like to share their feedback, or maybe by doing peer-to-peer research. It's certainly something we've done in the past. For example, with residentials, we had vox pop interviews, and we created sort of like 5 fast questions, and the young people went around and interviewed each other, and it was great. It just gave some really, really good feedback. So I'd encourage you to have a look on their website. Another, for example, method that they're suggesting that you could use is timelines. And this is an example from a project called Getting Out for Good, which worked with Manchester Met University, and they captured some stories of a group of females and how their engagement with specific projects had sort of changed over time. And you can see on the right there kind of how they looked at that young person's journey or life over time, and things that had changed and what had changed. So can be a really good way of looking at things differently, whether it's through using things like I said, like art, like body maps or graffiti walls, or technology. So kind of, yeah, you could use, like I said, videos or phones, or even things like Mentimeter, which we've used on the call today. So yeah, I definitely encourage you to have a look at that. But do bear in mind, you could get lots and lots of creative materials back, and then it's kind of, what do you do with them? So do have a good think about those first. So I guess at this point, it was really just kind of wondering whether anybody wanted to share, either through the chat, or if you want to take yourself off mute. I'm conscious that there's quite a lot of us, whether there's anything that's worked particularly well in the past, or whether there's different things that you are being asked for by funders, whether you would agree with the sorts of things that we've found over the past year to 16 months, that there perhaps has been a shift away from counting numbers to more. And I guess what would help you going forwards, we're really keen to kind of support organisations in their M&E. And I guess it's the sorts of thing, what sorts of things would be helpful? Is it general support and advice? Is it template surveys, opportunities to be involved in sort of evaluations? Because we do often manage to put evaluations into funding bids and work with universities, and that can provide organisations the opportunities to get involved without, if you like, the headache of having to manage those relationships. So I will just briefly stop sharing the screen, and then I can see the chat box. Dan, I don't know whether I'll just have a look now. Chris, I know you've got a few things. Did you want to take yourself off mute and mention anything you'd like to say, Chris?
Oh, I'm not on mute. I thought I should have been, so apologies for that. No, I don't. It's been a really good session, Ceris, so thank you, and Kelly as well. No, I just wanted to reinforce, well, I'll just direct people to the comments I made in the chat, just picking up on your valid point about networking with universities. I definitely think there's potential in that area, but as I've said in the chat, I just think, in making those links, folks just need to be aware and sensitive to the fact that universities have perhaps other slightly different drivers for undertaking this kind of research, particularly around publication and conference presentations and all that kind of thing. But that's not to say, and the key word here is common ground, it's not to say that there isn't scope to collaborate. There absolutely is. I think it's, as much as anything, it's about finding the right person or people within that university, who are really interested in this area of work and have got the relevant knowledge and skills, and also the right mindset to really want to work with you. Like with a lot of things, it's about finding the right people. In terms of Sheffield Hallam, as I said in the chat, I think our focus will have to be local for now. So please don't contact me from, I don't know, Cornwall or Northumberland, because I don't think, I'm quite happy to have a general chat, but I don't think we'll be able to do much beyond the local area in the immediate future.
Thanks, Chris. No, that's really good to know. Ros, I noticed you put something in the chat. I don't know whether you're happy to take yourself off mute and just expand a little bit on your point. Thank you. Hi.
Yes, hiya, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, wonderful. Yeah, it was just in response to your comment when you were talking about different more creative evaluation approaches, I suppose, because we were very much an organisation, and I'm Living Sports. I've come in the place of my colleague who then couldn't come today. So Living Sport with Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and we were very much, numbers, bums on seats kind of approach, and found that we weren't getting as much of that impact that we wanted to see from what we were doing. So we've been trialling some different creative evaluation approaches, most significant change being one of those, and that's a storytelling approach. Very kind of, it is quite process driven, so you have to follow the right process to be able to say you've done the most significant change technique. but it is about collecting stories from those participants that are involved in whatever it is you're doing, and then having a panel that sits to discuss all of them. We've had our first panel actually now, and it was quite interesting because the stories that came out, they weren't the ones perhaps that you would automatically have thought about that have made a significant change on the people. It wasn't about, they'd increase their physical activity levels so it just made them feel better. There were some really in-depth stories in there that actually just collecting data we would have missed completely. So I was agreeing with what you were saying, that it's the time investment though, because actually it took a lot longer to collect the stories, present them, talk about them, and then write a report afterwards, compared to just collecting data kind of on the day and at the end of the project. It was worth it because we got some interesting outcomes out of it. So yeah.
Right. Oh, thanks, Ros. That's really, really useful to hear. Thank you. Chris, I'm going to ask you, I don't know whether you can just briefly answer Andrea's question. She said, it'd be good to know what type of university courses could they approach?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Actually, I answered this question in a different context the other day in the workshop with your colleagues about working with young people. My answer would be, I think it could potentially be a number of different subject disciplines. Sport is the obvious one. So if you've got people in the sport and physical activity areas that are interested in this area, this aspect of sport development, that would be a really good starting point. But don't ignore, don't eliminate other subject disciplines like, and I'm thinking off the top of my head here, sociology, psychology, youth work. If there are courses in universities for training youth workers, there might be academics, researchers interested in collaborating with you. I think those would be the three main areas. Dave, I think Dave Hember's on the call, a colleague of mine as well. Dave, would you have any thoughts on that? I don't know whether he's still with us. No, maybe not.
Okay, no, thank you, Chris. That's great. And also really great to hear that I think Julie said they've just started connecting with universities in Hampshire for exactly that collaborative. Yeah,
great. So community studies as well. So, social policy, those kind of areas, I think there might be scope for collaboration.
Right. Lucy, you've shared that you've tried storytelling recently, linking with an art centre, and it really opened your eyes. I don't know whether you're happy to take yourself off mute and just share a little bit about that. That sounds really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm from Active Oxfordshire, and as part of our sort of Sport England TIFF bid, we kind of had a lot more flexibility than we've ever had before. So we kind of used a bit more what I'd probably call innovative, not so traditional methods. First time I've ever experienced or heard about it, and it actually came from one of the partners in the project who suggested it. All the other partners were really, kind of buoyed up and thought, actually, let's give this a go. And they were the ones who decided to do this form of evaluation. We just made it happen as a sort of partnership. We were learning, they were learning, and the sort of the richness of the information and the evaluation we got was, immense. And I'm not converted, but I'm kind of blown away, and it's really opened my eyes to evaluation methods and trialing new things and working with a group and to get the right approach. So yeah. If you want to know more about the methodology, it's quite flexible. I can give people more information, but it's worth exploring with the group. It depends on what you're doing, obviously. But
great. Oh no, thank you for sharing that. I'm conscious that we're nearly out of time, but I know, Tom, I wondered if you're still there, if you were happy to take yourself off mute, if you wanted to share a little bit more about what you've put in the chat around running your boxing project for young men.
Yeah. So I'm Tom. I work at Off the Record in Bristol, which is a young person's mental health charity. We've been running a project with a local partner called Empire Fighting Chance, which is a kind of boxing outreach organisation, a project that was funded through Comic Relief. And the aim was to get more young men, and particularly more young men of colour, involved in mental health. And we had a project that was set up that involved both boxing and psychoeducation. So Empire bought the boxing, we took the psychoeducation. And we were finding quite quickly that we're having some really, really amazing feedback, particularly from parents saying that their sons were showing much kind of less stuff around anger and much better sort of anger management and things like that. And we devoted the last session of every cohort to a kind of reflection session, initially just to find out what had gone well and what could have been better. And the young men were consistently reporting and have consistently reported over the 3 years that they've improved, anger management has significantly improved. But then when we give them we've been using the short Warwick Edinburgh wellbeing scales because the questions are quite nice. And one of the outcomes for the funders was improved mental wellbeing, and that's how we demonstrate it. I'd say more than half of them dipped according to their numbers. So something wasn't quite matching up. And I think what we kind of worked out was that and I think it comes back to the point that somebody made earlier about using a bit of ethnography, because I've got a background in anthropology, and people were saying that, I can come down and punch a punch bag for 2 hours a week. And I thought, okay, well, that doesn't feel like enough for the kind of change that people are reporting. So I think it was really interesting that the scales, a lot of the kind of clinical scales that are out there, don't quite capture the stuff that's going on, I think. So a lot of like the qualitative methods are really, really important. And it's we've sort of spent about 2 or 3 years thinking about kind of what's going on. And actually we think it's more around things like validation and normalizing of experiences and stuff like that. But that stuff's really hard to capture, I think. And if you're 11, you're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm down and punch back for 2 hours a week and I feel better. And you're like, okay, fine. But I think that was one thing that we learned quite quickly, was that some of the really, really good stuff is really, really hard to capture, actually.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah. Gosh, thank you, Tom. Yeah, no, it is. And I think, I guess for me, it kind of really sort of, demonstrates that you do, if you can try and do a mixed method approach, it really builds value. I'm really conscious of time, and that we're sort of due to finish very shortly. I guess I just wanted to finish with a final slide, if possible. And I also wanted to say, if you can, and pop in the chat, if there's one thing or something that would really help you in terms of your M&E, pop it into the chat, because we're really keen to know what sorts of things will help people going forwards. There we go. So I guess just to summarize, really, from our perspective, I think it's just be really clear at the outset in terms of what the difference is that you want to try and make and to whom, and then that will really help you to think about what sort of evaluation you might want to undertake, and also obviously really take into consideration your context and your audience. So without being teaching your grandmother to suck eggs, what might work for an older person's GP referral scheme is probably not going to work for a bunch of 60 lads playing football on a Friday night. So you really need to think about that. And there really is no sort of single magic best way of doing something. It's really about thinking what's right for you. Time to plan and to do it and to assess and review. But also think about, as we said, where you can collaborate with others, whether that's universities or networks or other partners, to try and make it as easy as possible. And consider those different approaches if you can. But also there is help available, whether it's through online resources, so some of those which are shared today, like Inspiring Impact and the different websites that can share questions. Also, obviously, things like through the tool Kelly shared, or through StreetGames Network itself. So I guess, it's just really, really kind of would ask you to kind of pop in the chat kind of ways you think would be most helpful, and kind of good luck, really. But I hope that what I'd like to think is that we kind of start in the conversation today, and that we'll, through sort of StreetGames Network meetings, keep coming back to evidencing impact and what people are doing, sharing best practice, but also hopefully providing the support that might be helpful to others. So thanks ever so much. Really appreciate your time today. I hope that some of it has been helpful. I hope you picked a bit of it out. But thanks very much for joining us.